Producer.
We are live,
All right,
Jack. We are live.
yes. And we ready. So what we're going to be talking about now is a specific topic that I told a young lady that I would address because I got into a somewhat of a small debate online. And this debate happened on TikTok when I saw a video by a lady whose name is Lauren Frisbee. That's what she goes by on TikTok. And she was discussing a very specific topic, which is lead poisoning. Is it harmful? And did it cause crime in the black community? Now, those of you who know me pretty much know my take overall. My take, in the most condensed form, is nothing causes crime in the black community but bad decisions. So she had a different take. And we'll watch her video if you want to get that ready,
Yep.
Mr. Producer, ready up. Because she
All
makes
right.
some good points, but I think she has an overall wrong assessment on the cause of the issues in the black community.
All right. You ready, Jack?
Go ahead.
Here we go.
If black kids are angry, it's because we poison their brains. Literally. Oh, you think black people are more violent? So weird how that happened right after we poisoned all their neighborhoods with lead. Fucking crazy. Oh, and this is not any conspiracy theory or anything like that. This is well-documented US history. And if nobody taught you this, it's probably because they didn't want you to know. So yeah, welcome to my latest rabbit hole. So let's start off with the science behind lead. Lead exposure is like one of the worst things that you can do to a developing child brain. It causes permanent damage to the part of the brain that deals with judgment and impulse control. It reduces IQ, and it increases aggression and risk-taking. This is proven. It causes learning disabilities, attention issues, and behavioral disorders. And it raises the chance of arrest, school expulsion, and unemployment later in life. And for most of the 20th century, poor black communities were deliberately soaked with this shit. Their homes, their pipes, their air, their soil, you name it, fucking lead. So wait a minute, if lead was so dangerous, why are we using it? And you guessed it, money. Tale as old as time, baby. Lead in the paint made it dry faster, it stuck better to surfaces, it resisted moisture and peeling, and it just looked like shinier and more vibrant, you know? And this was great for landlords and government-assisted housing, you know, the places that are trying to cut costs and shit. Perfect for them. Oh, but we also put it in gasoline too, but we made a new name for it though, so it sounds a little bit better. They called it tetraethyl lead, which this ended up making cars run better. You didn't have the knocking from engines, and it allowed manufacturers like GM to make their high performance cars. So win-win, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, even though all the factory workers in the GM plants and the DuPont plants and stuff like that started hallucinating and seeing bugs, like they literally called it the house of butterflies, because people were seeing bugs and swatting up. But yeah, even though all of this shit was actively happening, they were like, I think we're safe. Honestly, I think we're good. But they also put lead in all the pipes and stuff. So all your water's coming to your house, whatever, it's going through lead because lead was cheaper, it was easier to bend, you know, just, it's better, you know? But like, here's the thing, if we knew lead was bad, like we wouldn't have known this and still pushed it, right? Let's try again. Ready for this little timeline? In 1904, Australian doctors warned that lead paint killed children. France and Australia said, oh God, terrifying, ban it. The US said, I'll be all right. In 1992, the League of Nations recommended a global ban on lead paint. They said, this shit's bad. Nobody should be using this. And the US said, I'd rather not. Oh, and you can thank Sherwin-Williams for that and the Lead Industries Association, which was lobbying Congress. So round of applause, Sherwin-Williams, thank you so much. Oh, but then we got in 1924 when the workers at Standard Oil's New Jersey refinery died in mass. But they were hysterical. That was workers' hysteria. That was not lead, baby. So like, we're fine. Oh, and then in 1943, they had US studies that showed low-level exposure lowered your IQ. But still we were like, let's just bury those. Like, nobody needs to see those, okay? And then in 1971, the CDC created a safe threshold, but they put it like really fucking high. They're like, this is safe, like, I guess. We'll be fine. Stop complaining. You have your freedom. Shut up, you know? Oh, but of course, with this law, there was no enforcement in black communities because why would we do that? What? And then in 1978, the US finally banned residential paint. But oh, that was only for new construction. And there was no requirement of cleaning up the old lead paint. So, you know, the projects, the government housing, all those places where you pushed all those poor people into, yeah, we're not going back there. But the new homes, the rich people, we good. We Gucci, baby. And here's where it gets really really fucking crazy because it had me thinking, how many major cities were affected by this? Let's go through the list. We have Baltimore, Maryland. By the 1990s, 94% of poisoned children were, you guessed it, black. Ooh, yep. Peeling paint in aging row homes, water pipes, industrial waste sites saturated entire neighborhoods. Freddie Gray, yep, that one, the one that killed by the police in 2015. Yep, he was one of the poison guys. When they did the autopsy, they showed cognitive damage, ADHD, and lead-related developmental delays. Crazy, go figure, right? Baltimore's murder rate peaked at 353 in 1993, one of the highest in US history. And today, estimated 75,000 to 100,000 people are still affected. St. Louis, Missouri. Over 80% of black children tested in the 1990s had elevated blood lead levels. Public housing in North St. Louis was never remediated, like ever. Oh, and as recently as 2016, the city testing still found unsafe levels in kids' blood. So yeah, they estimate around 65,000 to 85,000 people are still being affected today in 2025. And most of these people live in neighborhoods with zero accountability. They're like, whatever, you got this, you're fine. And then we got Cleveland, Ohio. In 2004, more than 85% of homes still had lead paint. In fucking 2004, the city didn't enforce lead safety laws until 2019. Are you fucking kidding me? In 2018, Cleveland had the highest rate of lead exposure in Ohio, in the entire fucking state. Oh, and today, they're estimating around 70,000, 90,000 people are still affected, especially in East Cleveland and Glenville. God, this is fucking wild. Then we got Chicago. Chicago had the most lead service lines in the country, over 400,000. In the 1980s and 2000s, public housing projects like Cabrini Green were full of peeling lead paint and lead-tainted soil. Oh, and even now, South and West Side schools still show lower testing scores and higher suspension rates that correlate with historic lead maps. Like, the math is mathin'. Just do the fucking equation. And they estimate that today, around 200,000 to 250,000 people are still affected. Then we got Philadelphia. In 2000, 40% of children in some zip codes still tested positive for lead. Oh, but the enforcement laws exist there. They're just, not funded or followed or anything like that. Red tape, whatever. And in 2020, so 5 years ago, over 80% of rental units are still fucking failing the lead safety checks. And of course, they're in low-income neighborhoods. Go figure. So they estimate that around 90,000 to 120,000 people in the Philadelphia area are still being affected today. Then we got New York City. New York City banned lead paint in 1960, but the housing authority lied about the cleanup. In 2018, a federal investigation revealed that 19,000 children still living in the units that tested positive for lead. 19,000. The Bronx in particular shows the highest overlap between historical lead exposure and modern-day crime, incarceration, and underfunded schools. Still affected today, they're estimating around 250,000 to 300,000 people. So you want the total number of all these cities combined together? Yeah, they're estimating between 750,000 people and 945,000 people right now in 2025. But here's the most fucked up part about all of this. Let's say somebody escapes. You're 7 years old, you run away, you go live in Beverly Hills, I don't know, whatever the fuck. It doesn't leave you. You can literally pass lead poisoning on to your children through epigenetics. Lead does not mutate your DNA, but it changes how your genes express themselves. This ends up changing, I don't know, stress response, brain development, immune systems. So that means if someone was poisoned as a kid, they could still pass this shit down to their kid. Their kid could end up with lead in their bones. During pregnancy, the lead is released back into the bloodstream and passed directly to the fetus. Your child can be born with higher risks of anxiety, attention problems, learning disabilities, executive dysfunction. So even if you're in a nice neighborhood and you were lead poisoned as a kid, you're still fucked. So what happens when you poison millions of children and just send them off into the world and criminalize their behavior afterwards? You get over-policed communities, mass incarceration, general poverty, schools that fail, and entire families marked as failure before they even had a fucking chance. This is not culture or bad parenting. This is not a moral failing. This is fucking chemical warfare. And this shit has been hidden in plain sight, engineered by corporations, approved by the government, and then buried under the headlines like black on black crime. So next time somebody says, well, black communities these are just more violent. Show them the fucking paint chips. Because I'll tell you right now, the study showed that effects come about 20 years after the lead poisoning, which means the last people that have been poisoned, well, there's still shit going on right now, but we're still dealing with these effects. This shit's not gonna go away until we fix the root cause. So next time somebody says, systemic racism isn't real, I don't even know what that means, show them this fucking video. Because this shit, like I said, is fucking chemical warfare and absolutely unacceptable. And what you're looking at isn't a crime, baby. It's a fucking crime scene. And the criminals, still rich, still free, still in office. We need to fix that.
We need to fix that. She says that the black community is suffering from chemical warfare. That the reason that the black community is so deep in crime, that the reason why black people are committing more crime than pretty much every other race in America is not because of bad choices, not because of any other factors. It's because of the chemical warfare that was waged on them in the form of lead poisoning. Is this true? Do I have any facts to present any alternative arguments? Or is this just another form of the racism of low expectations? Well, let's get into it. And this is one thing that I think every person engaged in a debate should do. You should concede when somebody is right on something. That doesn't mean that their overall point is right. But the points where they do have a fact on their side, you should acknowledge that. And that's what we're going to start off doing. Where can we agree, Mr. Producer? I don't know if you have that first one.
No, I don't. I can get them up here though.
We can get it up here.
Yeah. Yep.
But while you do that, I can read this. Here's one thing I want you guys to notice, and I want you guys to take note of as we read through all these facts. Correlation does not equal causation. That means that just because two variables are statistically related, it doesn't mean that one causes the other. For example, ice cream sales are drowning incidents may rise together in the summer, but eating ice cream does not cause drowning. Both are influenced by warm weather. A third variable. The phrase warns against assuming a direct cause and effects in a relationship without evidence, as correlation can arise from coincidence, shared causes, or reverse causation. Understanding this helps avoid flawed conclusions in research or policy, like assuming an unrelated factor drives an outcome. I want you to pay attention to what I just read, okay? While we go through these facts. Did you find any of them, producer?
Yeah, found a few. It just take a few minutes for them to load up here.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I've got
My
'em.
bad.
I've got them. Just give me a minute or two to get everything going here.
Okay.
And we should all
Well,
be set
I'll
with
read
that.
some of the things of why we can't agree, since that's some of the facts that she already stated anyway. And I'll just read some of that. Where we can agree and where I can concede to. Lead is dangerous. If you say it doesn't have an effect or it doesn't cause any damage, you will be lying. Lead is dangerous. The fact one, lead poisoning causes severe health issues, particularly in children, including neurological damage, reduced IQ, and behavioral problems. You can see this in a CDC study in 2021. It notes that blood lead levels, commonly referred to as BLL, they impair cognitive function, which higher levels causing seizures and developmental delays. And for the source of that, you can look at the 2005 Environmental Health Perspectives. It found that you can have a whole 1 to 2 points dropped in IQ from being exposed to a certain amount of lead or lead poisoning. So it does affect IQ.
If black kids
Here's another thing. There is a link where, because of all the things stated before, that it can affect you mentally, it has been shown to parallel crime. Lead exposure is linked to behavioral issues like impulsivity and aggression, and can increase crime risk.
I've got him now, Jack.
Okay. So in that context, what's happening is you will see lead exposure go parallel with a bunch of other things. You will see the more lead that somebody has been exposed to, the lower their IQ, the more behavioral problems they have. But does this mean, and does it affirm many other statements that she made? Here's the problem. And I don't know if you can pull this up, Mr. Producer, but it's problems with studies linking lead exposure
Yep.
to behavioral problems.
Got him right here.
If you pull the first one up,
Yep.
you want to read
Sure.
some of that?
So, problems with studies linking lead exposure to behavioral problems. The first one is confounding variables, and the issue is behavioral problems like aggression, ADHD-like symptoms, or delinquency can be influenced by multiple factors such as socioeconomic status, nutrition, parenting styles, education, or exposure to other environmental toxins. Studies often struggle to control for all these confounders, which can mimic or amplify the apparent effects of lead. The misleading aspect of this is a correlation between lead exposure and behavioral issues might partly reflect socioeconomic deprivation. Children in low-income areas often face higher lead exposure and other stressors. If confounders aren't fully adjusted for, lead's specific role can be overstated. And then point 2, there's a retrospective and observational study. Most studies on lead and behavior are observational,
Yes.
cohort or cross-sectional studies, not experimental due to ethical constraints. You can't deliberately expose people to lead.
So here, let's pause there real quick.
Sure.
What that means is you can't do an accurate study on this because you cannot do a study exposing people purposely to lead at the same equal levels. You can't take a white kid, an Asian kid, a black kid, and say, we're going to lead poison you to see the results of that. So you're not going to get a conclusive study that says these actions, the result, or these more crime in these neighborhoods are the result of more lead poisoning. There's no way to conclusively study it because we don't have all the parameters that say black people were poisoned at this level and other people were poisoned at a higher level, and the higher level or the lower level compares to how much crime they did in their communities. We don't have those studies because it's unethical to poison people with lead. So we're making a lot of assumptions with these studies here. We can continue.
So continuing, these designs rely on historical data or natural exposure variations, which can introduce biases like recall errors or inaccurate exposure measurements, and it's misleading too. Retrospective studies may overestimate lead's impact if exposure levels are estimated imprecisely, like using old housing data as a proxy for lead exposure, or if behavioral outcomes are self-reported rather than objectively measured.
So one of the things that they haven't considered is this is over the span of a long period of time. In the mid to late 1800s to now, we have gotten better at being able to measure how much lead is used, how dangerous the lead we use, how it affects each person individually. We have gotten better in studying the results of that. She was quite a little bit misleading when she talked about how other countries assessed that it was dangerous, but then the US just said, nope, we're going to continue using it. It wasn't really like that. What happened is other countries saw that it was a danger, but they couldn't gauge how much danger it was and if the danger outweighed the cost. For instance, we can compare that to plastics now. Plastics have a dangerous effect on humans. Guess what else does? The water we drink has estrogen. It has a dangerous effect, especially on males. We haven't even concluded all the dangerous effects that plastics and the water we drinking have, because we know that the alternative is a very costly alternative. So it's not necessarily that we don't know it's dangerous, or that we did know it's dangerous, is that if we're going to replace all the plastic we use, we're going to have a very conclusive reasoning and a measure and a way to go about doing that. We can't just uproot all of society because we know there's some danger in it, if it's the only way we know how to do what we're doing. And as we'll see later, 70% of all houses in the late 1800s were built using lead. 70%. That's black, white, Asian, Hispanic, all of them. So let's continue on the measurement of lead exposure. I don't know. You lost something, Mr. Producer?
Yeah, I found it. There you go.
Okay.
I was looking at something else here at the moment. Yeah. So continuing
It's
on.
fine. We haven't even gotten to the main
Oh,
stuff yet.
I know. So here are the measurements of lead exposure. So accurately measuring lead exposure over time is challenging. Blood lead levels reflect recent exposure, but not necessarily cumulative or past exposure, which is critical for behavioral outcomes.
Yes.
Bone lead measurements are more accurate for long-term exposure, but are less common due to cost and invasiveness. And studies using only blood lead levels might miss the full scope of the exposure, leading to under or overestimation of lead's impact on behavior. Inconsistent measurement methods across studies also make comparisons difficult. And then there's defining and measuring behavioral outcomes. The behavioral problems are complex and subjective, often measured through tools like parent or teacher questionnaires, child behavior checklists, or clinical diagnoses. These can vary widely in reliability, cultural bias, or sensitivity to subtle effects.
Let me stop there and deal with the measurement of lead exposure here. Here's the thing. There's a more accurate way to judge whether the lead exposure was damaging. And what it was is they were using the BLL, but you can also use the bone lead form, where you're trying to see how much lead was in the bone marrow. I don't know if it's the bone marrow, but it was a way to see how much was in the blood and how much was in the bone. Well, the bone method was more accurate, but it was more costly. And so they're using the less accurate way to judge at what rate these people have been exposed to lead. And they had been doing the less accurate way all this time, because the more accurate way was far more expensive. So you have to take that in consideration when you're trying to judge, oh, these group of people have been chemically warfared against, as you said. When you make assumptions like that, you have to take everything into consideration, and that's what we're doing, because if you don't, you're making a very big judgment on a group of people. And we're going to talk about that in a second. You can continue, Mr.
Okay,
Producer.
sure. So I think we're talking about. I think we're still on the defining and measuring. Okay, so it's misleading, because if behavioral outcomes are inconsistently defined or measured, studies might overstate lead's role in causing specific behaviors, attributing general impulsivity to lead rather than other factors. Over-reliance on subjective reports can inflate apparent effects.
Yes.
And there's also a dose-response uncertainty. While high lead exposure is clearly linked to neurological harm, the effects of low-level exposure common in modern studies are less certain. Some studies suggest a linear dose-response relationship, but others find thresholds below which effects are negligible, creating debate about safe levels.
Here's the thing that if you want to condense this down, we don't know at what levels the damage affects behavior. We know it does damage, right? We know lead does damage. But you're making an argument that because there was lead poisoning, that we can conclusively say that this is why this certain group of people is committing more crimes. You can't conclusively say that, because then you would have to determine that at when they reach this level, well, let's say they're at level 0, when you have no lead poisoning, at level 10, when you're at maximum lead poisoning that leads to death, you have to have a study that conclusively say when they reach level 4 or 5, that is when more crime should start. Because the lead, if you're conclusively saying that lead poisoning causes more crime, then you have to say at what level will the crime start. All right, let's continue.
Sure. So moving on with that. Oop. Moving on with that. There we go. So there's a causation versus correlation argument here. And the issue is, as noted in the prior question, correlation does not equal causation. Many studies show associations between lead and behavioral issues, but cannot definitively prove that lead causes them, especially given confounders and observational designs. Media or advocacy groups may interpret correlations as causation, leading to alarmist narratives like lead causes crime without sufficient evidence. For example, studies linking lead exposure to later criminal behavior often rely on ecological data which can't confirm individual level causation.
Yes. And what I would say is, for everybody who go back, this is why we played her video in its entirety, so that people cannot say I'm taking her out of context, and that you can go back and watch. What happens, especially when you're in a debate with somebody, is they use deceptive framing tactics. And that means she framed things with a motive that she did not know was there. We're going to get to more to that when we talk about the race aspect of it. But what she did is she framed it. She made a couple of little witty jokes and said things like, oh, well, we don't care if it does damage, or who cares? It's making us money. And we don't know that. We have to deal with the facts that we do know and not attribute bad motives to the facts that we don't know. And when you do that, what it does is you're trying to make your argument stronger by saying white people did this because they're evil against black people. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to say, if it wasn't for those evil whites, black people wouldn't have been poisoned, and they would be just the same, if not better behaved, than all the other communities. And I would disagree with that. Because if you're attributing lead to their bad behavior, lead poisoning causing them to be bad, then you should see that everywhere now, shouldn't you? You should see it everywhere in every country. That, did you happen to know that there are other countries that had more lead poisoning than America? Oh, did you consider that? We have. And we're going to look into that in a little bit later. But what's the next point, Mr. Producer?
So the next point is we were talking about the defining and measuring of the behavioral outcomes. And behavioral problems are complex and subjective. Oh, you know what? We already talked about that. I'm sorry. You know what? I kind of lost my spot.
On number 7?
Yeah, number 7. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I just lost my spot.
No, you're good. There's a lot of information here that we going over.
I'm pouring through a lot of stuff.
Yeah, no.
and all these big words too.
Here's
you know,
the thing.
I'm like, what?
This one is, I want it to be in depth so that we know that I'm not just pulling this information out of my butt.
Gotcha. Yep. So we're at point 7. I got you. So yeah, we're here at point 7. Historical data and generalizations. Yeah. Many influential studies, the Herbert Needleman's work in the 1970s, for example, were conducted when lead exposure was far higher, like from leaded gasoline or from lead paint. These findings may not apply to today's lower exposure levels, yet they're often cited broadly. And applying high exposure findings to modern low exposure contexts can exaggerate risks. For instance, claiming current lead levels in water systems cause widespread behavioral issues may overstate the problem if based on outdated data.
Yes, and that's a very important point, because she brought up something to make her point stronger, which is epigenetics. Here's the problem with epigenetics, saying that lead changes your DNA. there's some truth to that, that it does have a lasting effect, and that that effect can go from generation to generation. Here's the problem. We don't know what that level is. We don't know at what point does it even affect the next generation. We know that we can see the change, but we can't conclude that the changes that go from generation to generation have a direct effect on your behavior. So that means that if somebody back in the 1800s, late 1800s, was to be exposed to a certain amount of lead, and they have it in their blood, they have it in their DNA, they have it in their bones, and then they have a child, she's making a very big jump to assume that the child that lead poisoned person have is going to have behavioral problems now because their mother and father was exposed to lead. Just because we know it can cross generation doesn't mean that we can absolutely conclude that it's going to affect the next generation's behavior in a negative fashion. You have to show studies for that. You can't just assume. Let's go to the redlining section. I don't know if we might
I've got
jump ahead, but a lot
some
of
of that right here. I've got redlining did happen, that point there.
yes, and I'm not
Yeah.
going to spend too long on this.
Right. Yeah.
So I'll just paraphrase it. You don't
Yep.
have to read it.
Okay.
Redlining did happen. Redlining meaning that there was black communities and there was white communities, and black communities could not live amongst the white people. White people typically got away from the black communities, and it was harder for a black man or a woman to find a home that was sale to them in those communities. That was what a lot of Martin Luther King's movement was all about. It was saying, listen, we need to live amongst each other as one country. Every man is equal. You should be judged by the content of your character. We all heard these things before. This is what happened in our country's history. And here's another secret. Every single country on the face of the planet has a version of racism
Monkeys
that
will
they
be
have dealt with.
monkeys.
And that's just the fact of the matter. Now let's deal with the next section, which is a claim she made. She made a claim. And this is where we really get to where me and her disagree. She said things like, we poisoned them. She said things like, we used chemical warfare. We. Who is we? It can either be white people, it can be people of higher status, it can be, I don't know, people of a certain richer versus poor. But when you say we, and then you use the context of black people, it leads me to believe that with the history of the United States, that when you say we, it means white people purposely poisoned black people. And I have a problem with you saying that because you're attributing motives to people who are not alive and cannot defend themselves. And you're also giving this extremely grandiose idea of the evil white man that went so far out of his way to poison a race of people for no other reason than just hate. Let's discuss that, because if you don't think that, I think that's a very far-fetched thing to say. Because for one, we have to look at what led historically. You have to question, and this is the first thing we'll look into. Is this something that was you can attribute to hate or practicality? Practicality versus hate. Hate is done. You can do things that are completely illogical simply for the fact of I don't like you and I want your people to die. But then you have practicality, which means this is cheap. We can build a bunch of houses like this. Matter of fact, it's so cheap that the cheaper houses will have more lead. And because the cheaper houses have more lead and black people live in cheaper housing, black people will be more affected by lead. You see the third variable we talked about when we said everything is not always causation correlation? Sometimes there's a third variable, which is cheaper housing was built using lead, 70%. And because of that, black people lived in cheaper housing because of all the things doesn't mean that it was necessarily targeted. It just happened to be that they had to live in the cheaper housing, and because of that, you get the situation of lead poisoning. Here's another thing that I've referred to about before. Other countries had poorer people too. They had the same thing happen to their poorer communities. They lived amongst lead as well. Here's the question you need to ask. With those poor communities, did they have the same results that black people did? I wonder. Let's look into this. The section 3.
Here we go.
Lead's historical use.
Yep. Is this the historical? We've already gone through this one here. I think we're talking about publication bias and reporting there. That's
yeah. We skipped
skipped
forward
that
on that
part,
part
yeah,
because that's kind of a smaller
okay.
point.
Yeah, I mean, it's just talking about studies linking it are more likely to be published than those finding weak or no effects.
Yes, true.
Those kinds of things. And then we were moving on to which part again, Jay?
Then the red line part was after that, but then after that is the first point of white people or the government are not poisoning the black community on purpose.
Yep. So I've got this. Yep. Here we go.
Here we go.
Yeah. So white people or the government are not poisoning the black community on purpose. We've poisoned their brains. Lead's historical use, and kind of what you were talking about. Lead paint and pipes used heavily from the 1880s to the 1950s were standard for cost and durability. Talking about more for like convenience,
yes,
and for practicality. In 70% of homes, and that's from EPA data, awareness of dangers grew in the 1920s. The Journal of American the Medical Association in 1926, with full understanding by the 1970s from the CDC in 1976.
So look how long it took them to understand the damage they were doing.
It took them a long time.
It took them a very long time. Now you can make the argument. She makes the argument in her video that there was a lot of lobbying, and that is true. There was some lobbying of people that were trying to protect their own interests. Like you had ethanol countries and whatever was producing the lead pipes were saying, "Oh, this is not as dangerous." The same thing they do with things today. People that protect their own interests. I'll tell you one big one: the corn and the adult industry. They are not talking about how dangerous that is for the male mind. But we don't talk about that now, do we? We tell people do what they want to do. It's damaging the young male mind, but when it comes to pornography, people say you do what you want to do. But when we knew the dangers of lead and we could study and see that it was dangerous, we allow people to live there because they chose to live in cheaper housing.
Right.
Or you can even argue that's the only option they had. But we do plenty of things like that to this day. If you look, rich people have all types of water filters and can afford. I seen a water filter that they were selling for about $400 the other day, and it gets all types of stuff out of the water that I can't afford. They know it's doing damage to me. 10 years from now, are we going to look and say it's racist white people with their water filters? That will be the logical conclusion that you would say racist white people, and they took the water filters and they didn't let black people have them. But the reality is, the richer you are, the more luxury items you get to have. That's the way of the world. It has nothing to do with race. Continue. You can continue, Mr. Producer.
Yeah, so there's also no evidence of intent. So no primary sources of government documents show deliberate targeting. The 2022 JAMA pediatric study cites redlining, not conspiracy, for black children's 3 times higher BLLs. And in white communities, they're affected too.
Yes.
Poor white areas like Flint, Michigan in 2014, and Appalachian towns as well too, also face lead exposure with similar behavioral risks at equal levels.
If it is white people, why did they poison their own people? If it is
Why?
rich white people doing this,
Why?
is it just the rich white people? Is it the poor white
Mhm.
people? Is it just the secret government? Who are you talking about? Because if you saying it's white people who did this to black people, they poison their own people in Flint, Michigan as well.
Right.
White people suffer
Right.
from it too. So how is this? What are you trying to get at here? It's always usually a white liberal woman specifically that will say these talking points, and they don't expect you to question them. And then when you do, it's like, well, yeah, it's just the way it is. Well, you got to prove that. If you're going to throw that accusation that black people had chemical warfare enacted against them, you're going to have to prove that. That's a war crime. That's stuff like Saddam Hussein did to his own people.
Yeah.
You're saying that it couldn't possibly be that it was more practical to use lead? Couldn't possibly be that, could it? Nope. It has to
Nope.
be somebody's evil intentions, according to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's.
Should we continue with
Yeah, we
this?
can continue.
Okay. Yeah, you're talking about targeting black communities for crime via lead lacks logic, as lead's effects harm all groups and reduce economic productivity. Between $17 and $221 return per dollar spent on abatement from health affairs, and then there's a study from the American Journal of Public Health that details lead's widespread use and slow regulation, not race targeted.
Yes. In fact, you would have to prove that. If you make that assertion that it was chemical warfare that was targeting the black community, you have to prove not that it happened because black people lived in poor neighborhoods, but that it was specifically targeting for them being black. And if you can't prove that, you can say, I think this, but your whole video was that you know this. This is a fact. Just show people the paint chips, right? And now people can just turn around and show them this video for proof. When people talk about all the bad things going on in their own communities, they don't have a right to because black people were poisoned. Right? We just want to do things cheaply. Right? So let's go to the next point, which is lead poisoning is not the best explanation for crime in the black community. Do we have that one, Mr.
Yep, I
Producer?
do. Here we
Okay.
go. Yep. So lead poisoning is not the best explanation for crime in the black community, just as you said. There are limited comparative studies. Few studies directly compare black and white children's crime rates at equal levels due to ethical constraints.
Let me stop there because this is a very important point. And this is the point that I made to her on TikTok. You cannot make these extremely critical claims if you don't have the studies to go along with it. You can just throw out facts, or you can say, listen, we have studied the black kid and the white kid at the same exact age or around the same age range with the same amount of lead poisoning and see that they had the same or darn near the same results. If you can find any group of people that has had different results with the same or more lead poisoning, then your argument is invalid. And I'm going to prove to you that in other countries, they did not have the same response that black people did. They didn't go around and commit more crime. They didn't go around shooting each other in some even countries that don't have guns. They didn't go around stabbing each other. They didn't go around throwing bricks at each other. They didn't loot and destroy things. There is a real problem, but it's not lead that's making somebody make bad choices. Can they contribute in the same way that if you have a headache, it can contribute to your bad attitude? It didn't make you have a bad attitude. You chose to have a bad attitude because you didn't want to deal with the pain. But the headache doesn't make you have a bad attitude. All right, so let's continue.
All right, so I'm seeing more scientific talk here. So so you're talking about global comparisons. The Republic of Georgia, they had 41% of children with BLs of approximately 5, whatever that is,
I
per
think it's
whatever.
called Tbilisi, and it's a
It's
the capital of the
yeah,
country of
yeah,
Georgia.
it's the Republic of Georgia. It's
Hmm.
near Russia up that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a UNICEF study from 2018. In Chinese regions like Zhejiang, I think it is.
Hmm.
So they were looking at 233 adults and 99 children were affected. And that's from 2001. But those studies showed no huge violent crime surges despite severe lead poisoning, unlike U.S. claims of a 3 to 6 time arrest rate. The homicide rate in the Republic of Georgia, their rate fell to 1.03 per 100,000, according to a study in 2016. And China's crime data shows no clear lead-driven spikes from Science Direct from 2020.
And here's the thing: I had more places. There were places in Brazil, and there were also some other places in South America that also had lead poisoning. But the reason why, and it was in UK as well. But I chose China for a specific reason, and those who understand how I think will know. It's because if you choose somebody with a similar culture like the UK, then you might have similar outcomes. But if you really want to study whether it was the culture that contributes to crime rather than the lead, then you want to look at studies from a very or drastically different culture. And the culture of Georgia and the culture of China is drastically different than the one in America. So, which means that culture plays a far stronger part in the crime that followed lead poisoning than we like to act. Because when their countries had lead poisoning, and I looked into deep because I couldn't even post all the facts here, but when some of these kids and some of these countries had far worse lead poisoning than America did, and because of that, you didn't see any growth in crime. So why did it happen in the black community? Why can they be poisoned at a rate higher than us and still see less crime than us? Now you can make an argument, oh, their statistics in China are not even they don't really look at statistics the same. Well, what about in Georgia then? What about in other places in Europe then? Everyone in the world was using lead. It wasn't just cheap for America. It was plenty places in the world that used it and did not see the same results as we see in the crime in America. So let's continue. This
So,
family structure, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. So the family structures has a greater impact. Single parent homes increase delinquency risks of 2 to 3 times, according to the Criminology Report in 2018. And it's far outweighing lead's 7 to 28% crime risk increase from a meta-analysis study in 2022. In 1990, 70% of black children lived in single-parent homes versus 25% of white children,
Wow.
according to the U.S. Census Bureau.
Now we're getting to the source of the real problem. We're going to study next what the true issue is in the black community. It's not lead. Let's go to the real issue. And we're going to do some comparative studies. If I'm claiming, which if you smart, you can already tell by now, fatherlessness has way worse effect on lead, let's compare the effects of lead poisoning versus the effects of fatherless homes. Now, here's what people are going to argue. They're going to say lead caused fatherlessness. Lead, its causes and its misbehavioral, causing misbehavior, causing low IQ, that preceded. But that's not true. Because if you look at the timeline, lead poisoning was all the way back to the mid to late 1800s. And black people, all the way to the 1950s, before the Great New Deal, had been married far more than white people even were. Until after the New Deal, which caused them to change their behavior. That's what changed them. They made bad decisions. The lead from the 1850s all the way to the 1950s was still there. The regulations had not kicked in until the late 1970s. So why were they more married and in better stable homes until the 1950s and had less crime until after the fathers left the home? Explain that to me. Crime started in the black community to go on a strict upward momentum rise after the fathers left the home, not right when lead came into the homes. Explain that to me. Let's go.
Okay.
I mean, we getting on some facts
We
here.
are. We are. So look at this. So statistics highlighting fatherlessness, the impacts of that versus lead poisoning.
Yes.
So the youth incarceration rates, fatherlessness, 85% of youths in prison come from a fatherless home, 20 times the national average. And in comparison, fatherlessness shows a stronger statistical association with incarceration. 85% of imprisoned youths, it's like we talked about in the first point there.
Yes.
Compared to lead's variable contribution to crime, lead's impact is significant, but often mediated through cognitive deficits, while fatherlessness correlates with broader social and emotional risk factors.
That is 100% true. 85% of youths in prison come from fatherless homes. There's no denying that fact. Let's go to the high school dropout
Sure.
rate.
So 71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes, 9 times the national average.
71%.
And fatherlessness has a more direct and dramatic correlation with dropout rates, while lead's effect on education is less quantified and more indirect through IQ and learning difficulties.
Here's the next one, very important.
Suicide rates. 63% of youth suicides, are from fatherless homes, 5 times the national average.
63%. You want to claim that that lead is causing this? When we can prove that fatherlessness is causing this. And here's the thing. If you want to talk about the dangers of lead poisoning, you can talk about that. But here's the thing we don't know. We don't know at what levels. We don't know how much it affects behavior, meaning that if you have a certain amount of lead poisoning, does that mean you do 2 crimes or 3 crimes or more crime or how many crimes? And we don't know any of that. But what we do know for a fact is fatherlessness does correlate to whether you go into prison or not. It does correlate to whether you want to off yourself or not. It does correlate to depression and mental illness. We know these for a fact. And we got the percentage down to the centimeter that affects that. We know that for a fact. So how about we deal with the facts we know instead of the things we don't? Instead of blaming something on lead, how about we deal with the fact that we know that 80% of the black community is born out of wedlock? Instead of dealing with something we can barely judge and we didn't have a real good way to judge it for a long period of time. And even now, there's different types of testings you can do on BLL and all that stuff. Well, how about we do what we know is right? My fault before I get on a tirade.
So, continuing with that suicide rate, fatherlessness has a clear, stark association with youth suicide. That's a 63%.
Yes.
While lead's mental health effects are less specific and not directly linked to suicide, making fatherlessness appear more drastic in this context. Then we move on to behavioral disorders. 85% of children with behavioral disorders come from a fatherless home, 20 times the national average. Fatherlessness shows a higher prevalence, 85% of behavioral disorders, compared to lead's correlation with behavioral issues, which lacks a specific percentage but is significant at low exposure levels. Fatherlessness' broader social impact amplifies its statistical weight.
85% of children. And here's the other thing, too. You want to know why these statistics blow the lead argument out of the water? Is because these are for everyone as well. They're not just the black community. So you seen a rise in crime with the black community as they're affected the lead, but you didn't see that same thing with Asian people or Georgian people. But when you have fatherlessness, you see the same results with all groups of people. You can take a fatherless Asian kid and he will have the same problems as a fatherless black kid. But then when you put both of them and expose them to lead, in the Asian communities, you didn't see the rise in crime because 80% of them were married. So the lead argument is stupid. So, anyways, the homeless, we can just skip through. I'll just skip through a lot of these.
Okay.
Where we
Okay.
at homelessness.
Yeah, and
Because
and
I'll
the-
just go
and
through
the
this
runaways,
and do
yeah.
with the we'll rapid fire these.
Okay.
The homelessness and runaway, 90% of homeless and runaway children come from fatherless home. Teen pregnancy rates. This is crazy. Daughters from fatherless home are 711% more likely to have children than as teenagers. Drug and alcohol abuse.
Wow.
Children of single parents or often fathers' homes are 30% more likely to use drugs or alcohol. Child abuse and neglect. Children in single parent homes that are fatherless face a 27.3 out of 1,000 rate of abuse or neglect, and nearly doubled the percent rate in the two-party homes. So they double the two-party homes in child abuse and neglect. And here's another point that I want to say. Lead poisoning, we can't conclude contributes to that, but fatherless homes, we can for a fact conclude if this child comes from a fatherless home, these statistics will follow. But we can't conclude, oh, if this kid has lead poisoning, these statistics will absolutely follow like we can fatherlessness. So why not deal with the things we know? Let's go to our final points here. And here's another argument that they're going to say. Somebody will say, well, two things can be true at once. Lead poisoning causes bad behavior and fatherlessness causes bad behavior. Wrong. We don't have conclusive studies. We're making an assumption when it comes to lead poisoning. We're not making an assumption when it comes to fatherlessness. We are making an assumption that correlation equals causation when it comes to lead. When you look at lead poisoning, we have no conclusive studies that says if you have lead poisoning, you will go out, grab a gun, and rob somebody. We do have studies that say if you are fatherless, you are more likely to end up in these predicaments. Across every country, in every region, and every race. It's so funny that the lead poisoning didn't affect other countries the way it affected African Americans. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't drop IQs or didn't have mental illness or things like that because of lead, but they surely did not have a rise in crime. You don't see Georgians doing the gangster rap stuff that we do, where they doing drive-bys on each other. Now, somebody gonna try to show me some video of them doing it now. Here's the thing. The degree that we're doing it is a cultural thing because we have no fathers in the home. And if we don't want to accept responsibility to that, don't talk about the lead that's coming from the pipes if you're not talking about the lead that's being shot off these guns by the criminals. Let's go to our last one. And here's the thing that this is just logical here. She made a point later on in her video, and this is going to be the cost of removing and repairing. She made a point that even though we knew all these things, we just thought we'll just let black people suffer. Even though we knew we should have removed the lead, we still let black people die from lead poisoning. And what in the world was that? We still let all these bad things happen because of lead and this and this and that. My problem with that is you're not thinking about things practically, you're thinking about things emotionally. When you address an emotional topic, or an emotional from a situation or a position of emotion, you say, "We should have done this, we should have done that, and oh, these people were hurt." Instead of saying what was practical to do with the information that we had at the time. So let's read the next one.
So we're talking about the cost of removing, right?
Yes.
So the cost of removing, repairing, or replacing lead in black communities, along with versus slow
We can just
learning.
read the industry.
Yeah,
one.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. So industry influence and denial. So the lead industry, particularly companies like Ethel Corporation and paint manufacturers, aggressively promoted leaded gasoline and lead-based paint while downplaying the risks. They funded studies to cast doubt on lead's dangers, similar to tobacco industry tactics. This created a narrative that lead was safe in small amounts, delaying regulatory action.
Here's the thing. Do we have that to put on screen too?
Which one?
The last one. Because I don't think it was up. What's going on up there?
Well, I don't know. Was this were we still talking about the cost of removing
Yeah,
things?
if not, we can go to the next one.
Yeah.
The widespread use and economic interest. But yeah. If not, I can read. I can just read it.
I've got problem missed opportunity. I don't think I've got that one.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just read it.
I got it on my. If you want to read it, go ahead.
Oh, you know what that probably is? It's 4th of July. So I'm hearing all
That's
types
it.
of fireworks.
It's fireworks.
Yeah.
That's it. It's fireworks.
I'm thinking I
Yeah.
might have to do something.
Wow.
All right. But yeah, widespread use and economic interest. Lead was cheap, effective, and deeply embedded in products like gasoline, paint, and several other things. The economic benefits to industries created a resistance to regulation as phasing out lead required costly alternatives and infrastructure changes. And let me skip to, there's a lot of other things I could read, but for the sake of time, we'll skip to the data gap sections and testing limitations. Reliable testing for blood lead levels in children wasn't widespread until the 1970s, and earlier diagnostics tools were less sensitive. Without clear data showing widespread harm, the issues struggled to gain traction. By the late 1960s, urban studies showed elevated blood lead levels in children near industrial areas, raising alarm. The Clean Air Act in 1970 and subsequent EPA actions targeted lead and gasoline after studies linked emissions to public health risks. So all the way in the 1970s, they didn't fully understand the damage they were doing. And when they were doing the damage, you could argue that some people did understand it. But not everybody had a full understanding of was it cost effective enough to take this out. Let's go to the cost estimates section. I don't know if you have that.
I do.
I'm just gonna. You
Yep.
can put it up there,
Yep.
but I'm gonna
I
go
got
through
'em.
it
Yep.
fairly fast because
I
I
got
don't
'em.
want to read
I
all
got
of
'em.
these
Here we
numbers.
go. Yep. I
But
got
just
'em.
show you, we'll
I got
put
'em.
some of these facts,
Yeah, I got them.
and what maybe we'll do like a Substack or something like that, so everybody can
Okay.
read it because we
Sure.
can't
Right.
we can't post all of
Right.
these to
Mhm.
YouTube.
Right.
But
right.
here's what I will say: lead abatement, paint and pipes, just to replace the paint and pipes, would cost $10,000 to $50,000 a home, and $150 million to $750 million in the 1930s. Replacing the pipes, not just repairing them or doing the total $30 million to $200 million. Housing replacement, building new homes without lead, would cost $2,000 to $5,000 per unit. And the overall cost would be $2 billion to $5 billion. And then it says $97 billion if we were talking about $2025. The infestability, or my fault, infestability. The total cost, and then the infeasibility. The Great Depression happened in 1929 to 1939. It slashed the federal budget. Remember, this took place. The Great Depression took place right in the middle of this epidemic. So the GDP, 66 billion in 1933. Only 1 billion was allocated after the New Deal housing program, making large scale lead removal impossible. And here's the thing, I hate the New Deal. If you look into that, you'll see the history of it and what it did to black people is far more damaging than lead could ever do. It was the New Deal that kicked fathers out the home to begin with. And then you saw the crime rise. So explain to me what's more damaging. The New Deal caused way more damage than lead ever could. The 2000 cost estimate, so recent cost estimate, paint and pipes, about 10 billion to 50 billion. Housing replacements that would be recent, 100 billion to 200 billion. And total cost with all the replacements and all the repairs, 112.8 billion to 262.3 billion. That's recent. How much it would cost to remove our lead now. Infeasibility. The 2021 Infrastructure Act allowed 55 billion for lead pipes, falls short of the needed 169 to 393 billion that we would need. So, with all this argument of we're just doing things out of evil intent, that white people just wanted to poison black people, that is just evil people. Consider the fact that because of its practicality and easy to use, it was no plausible way that they could have redid or fixed the problem with the amount of money they had. The real problem in the black community and why we didn't take advantage like many others did. Do you have that part up, Mr. Producer? I don't know if we have that. If not, I'll just read it.
That's something called the problem missed opportunity. Is that it?
Yeah, it's part of the section. I think the single mother barriers to
I don't-
lead mitigation.
I don't have that. No.
I'll read it.
Oh, I don't have that. No.
Because this is like the one of the last sections. Yeah. Anyways, so single mothers barriers to lead mitigation, economic strain. In 1990, 70% of black children lived in single mother households. They had an income about $20,000. So repairing the filters and repairing and replacing was completely unaffordable for a single mother. Time constraints. 60% of black single mothers worked full time. Limiting advocacy or engagement with the lead hazard control grants, because there was grants and all types of stuff. There were grants and there were all types of organizations that help people get into more healthier living places. But because the mothers were single and they couldn't go and apply for these grants, they couldn't take advantage of the stuff that was made available to them. Whose fault is that? That they were single mothers raising these kids. They chose to have these kids and be single mothers. Nobody made them do that. If they would have had fathers in the home, they would have been able to get their kids to a healthier environment. But they didn't because of their bad choices. Not because of lead poison in their brains, because of bad choices. Poor lobbying for healthcare outcomes. Limited resources at the time of a single mother household reduced community advocacy compared to groups like Baltimore's 1980s tenant lawsuits. Other people did accomplish lawsuits. The black community didn't. Other people did sue. The black community didn't. And you know why the black community didn't? If you go back and you do the research, because I did a lot of research for this. Black community did not trust anybody And you could say that's for a valid reason, but they didn't trust government, they didn't trust lawyers, they didn't trust the lawsuits, they didn't trust anybody. So they didn't go through with anything. They stuck it out and they paid the price. The other missed opportunities. Places like China in 2014 won 40,000 to 90,000 won per family. Black communities underutilized legal action due to single mother constraints and distrust of the systems. I just talked about that. Community disunity. While 1930s black communities were unified, remember I said that? 1990s economics pressures and 70% of single parent rates strained the collective action. Like Georgia's cohesive response. Georgia had a response. In the country Georgia, y'all thinking I'm talking about the state Georgia. In the country Georgia, they had a response where they all came together and said, we're getting our children out of these deadly lead infested places. The black community did not do that. And why didn't they? Because they were ran by single mothers who didn't have the time to think about lead poisoning. Having a father in the home is not just, oh, he bringing more money. It's to protect you from outside dangers, internal dangers, and even the dangers like lead poisoning you cannot see. And the black community failed to act on that. They made bad choices. This is the last point. Statistical disadvantage of single mother household. Children in single parent households face 2 to 3 times higher delinquency risk, 1.5 higher dropout rates, and lower academic achievement compared to 3 to 5 IQ point loss. Remember we talked about the IQ point loss of lead, how it was 1 to 2. But the IQ point loss of single fatherhood is 3 to 5. So what is the bigger problem? Anybody making this, and this ain't the first time I heard this debate before. Anybody making this lead argument as if lead is the main cause of crime in the black community, you're not thinking things through. I want to be respectful to this young lady because she was respectful in response to me, but she's just dead wrong, and I would debate you any day on this. The facts are on my side. Lead is not the cause of the problem in the black community. It is a contributor, but it is not the overall cause. In the same way that eating unhealthy is a contributor to some of the problems in the black community, but it is not the overall cause. And we got to stop doing this. Is why, and this is my final point, Mr. Producer. I talked about this last week. The racism of low expectation comes in many forms.
Yeah.
In this form, what it is white people saying, oh, we figured it out. This is why black people are shooting each other and killing each other and gang banging and sagging their pants and doing robberies and carjacking. It's the lead. No, it's because they've made bad decisions and they need to correct bad behavior. And let's go even deeper. The last thing. The reason why there's no fathers in the home, the reason why these young boys are raised to be criminals, the reason why these young girls is having sex and having kids at teenage ages is because they don't follow God. We traded God in for the New Deal, for the government. For government assistance, we said, we won't get married, master. We gonna kick the man out the house, sir. Good sir. And we'll replace it with the government. And now look at us. If lead poisoning started in the late 1800s, then why is it we was married and having good families up until the 1950s? If that's not a good enough response for you, then you just don't want to see the truth. And you probably think less of black people, that you think we got some ailment, some lead poisoning holding us back, rather than thinking highly of us that we can achieve whatever we want to achieve, and we are the only thing holding us back. That's it.